Open source at Xilinx. Xilinx has had a long history with open source, and the future of open source at Xilinx is bright, with many opportunities. Today, in industry, open source software is everywhere. Let's look at one of the most famous examples, Linux. Here's some data from the Linux Foundation's 2017 State of Linux Kernel Development Report. Linux ran on 62% of the embedded market share, on 82% of the world's smartphones, and ran 90% of the public cloud workload. Since 2005, there have been over 15,000 developers contributing to the Linux kernel from over 1,400 different companies. And this work isn't only being done by hobbyists for free anymore. As of 2017, 85% of all Linux kernel development was done by developers paid for that work. And, as a real validation of the importance of Linux, in 2018, IBM acquired Red Hat for $34 billion. Today, at Xilinx, we do a lot of open source work, and it's growing. If you look at a plot of the creation of repositories on Xilinx's GitHub, 80% were added since 2016. Xilinx is committed to participating in major open source community projects, investing in memberships in several open source organizations. Xilinx not only participates in major projects, but also contributes code to quite a few. Xilinx played a leadership role in establishing the OpenAMP and Pink projects. If we look back, looking at the tech industry, it wasn't obvious that open source would rule the world. Linux was very much a Cinderella story with humble beginnings. When Linus Torvalds began the project in 1991 as a university student, it was his hobby project to learn more about his computer. He had no dreams of it becoming a professional operating system. But he kept with it, and more people joined the project through online collaboration. And it got to the point in 1998 where big companies like IBM, Compaq, and Oracle felt Linux support was worth investing in. By 2001, Microsoft recognized Linux as a threat, and Steve Ballmer called the open source movement a cancer. Public relations battles ensued, but in the end, Linux emerged strong. In 2014, the Ubuntu Linux distribution alone claimed 22 million users, and even Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella sang its praises and told the world, Microsoft loves Linux. Looking back at Xilinx, we dipped a toe into open source relatively early, long before it was all the rage. Looking at Linux at Xilinx, it played an important role early on, and we have been using it for over 18 years. Back in 2001, when Microsoft was just starting to take Linux seriously, we were using Linux PPC for pre-silicon testing of the PowerPC 405 on our emulation platforms. In 2002, we collaborated with Monte Vista to ship a Linux demo with the ML300 Customer Evaluation Board, and Xilinx was featured in the Linux Journal. In 2005, a Linux drivers team was established at the Xilinx Hyderabad office to write drivers for Xilinx IP cores. In 2007-2008, we had a dedicated engineer start in the systems engineering team focused on the Linux kernel. And in 2007, we had a big accomplishment. Xilinx's first contribution to the upstream Linux kernel was submitted by Xilinx Labs. Let's take a look at the hardware that motivated Xilinx to work with open source software. Xilinx started using Linux for system-level testing of PowerPC and Microblaze processors during the R&D phase. Those were released in Xilinx products in 2001 and 2002 respectively. Xilinx continued down the path of platform FPGAs with the PowerPC 405 in Virtex 4 and PowerPC 440 in Virtex 5 FXT. Then, platform FPGAs evolved into our system-on-chip families with the Zinc 7000, Zinc UltraScale Plus MPSoC, and now Versal. Taking the step from platform FPGAs to systems on chip with Xilinx 7000 was very important in Xilinx's open source journey, really pushing us to take the plunge into open source. Xilinx 7000 produced a new breed of customers for Xilinx. It let us reach new target markets that had greater system complexity and more sophisticated software requirements. But it meant that the solution now had to include runtime software that was well tested on silicon, and had to include tools that would enable development and abstract away complexity. Customers not only had FPGA engineers, but also embedded software teams. Or the end users of a Xilinx 7000 might just want to build an application on top of a development board with minimal fuss about the programmable logic that was doing their hardware acceleration. Aside from the hardware impetus to push Xilinx to become active in open source development, we had some other important milestones that got us to where we are today. We talked about the first two already. Then, acquiring the startup Pedalogix gave us Petalinux tools to support development on Xilinx 7000 and brought to Xilinx important open source know-how from that team. Xilinx has taken a leadership role in open source projects, employing maintainers from major community projects and leading the OpenAMP and Pink projects. Adopting Yocto has been key in enabling Xilinx customers and partners using a standard open source flow and aligning Xilinx with commercial Linux solutions. And adopting a kernel rebase strategy has been important to streamline Linux development for Xilinx customers, since Xilinx devices are often components in multi-architecture systems or product lines. Looking forward, the future is bright, with an abundance of opportunities. We can learn a lot from successful open source projects. Most are globally distributed projects, with many developers collaborating online. With very little face-to-face contact, these projects are able to produce excellent results. As a global company, Xilinx could really benefit from global collaboration best practices. An interesting aspect of open source projects is that developers must build reputations and trust within their communities. So, they have to stand behind their work that's out in the public, and make sure that a basic quality level is maintained for users. This makes code more reliable and brings immense value to customers and partners who rely on it. We can realize many benefits from contributing code upstream to open source projects. Upstreaming means working with the project communities to get the code from the Xilinx GitHub accepted into the main code branch that all the organizations out there are working with. While one can talk about technical leadership, having good code out in public validated by a community of technical experts demonstrates technical leadership. With code living and being maintained in upstream projects, we have more eyes looking at it. This helps it to stay higher quality and we get feedback sooner, lowering bug fix and maintenance costs. Because Xilinx has so many different customers with a wide range of needs, having code upstream means we can enable an ecosystem to support the solutions. And having code upstream means we're able to get the features included in major Linux distributions like SUSE or Ubuntu. While most people think of software when we talk about open source, there are also opportunities for Xilinx in open source hardware projects. In 2018, DARPA funded the POSH project. It's an open source system-on-chip design and verification ecosystem. The tools in the stack are open source, and the goal is to create an environment in which the next wave of US semiconductor innovation can take off. Xilinx has a team working on co-simulation of RTL in a mixed simulation environment with the very fast software emulation tool QEMU, which is short for Quick Emulator. So, to wrap things up, open source at Xilinx is not new. It has been, and will be, very important to Xilinx's product strategy. We need to enable the community and participate to be successful in open source. And not just participate, but continue to be good corporate citizens in the communities and try to do more.